Fantastic. Welcome, everyone. We'll just let everyone enter. We've got a few people just joining us before we get started. Great to see so many of you here today. We'll just give it a minute. I've seen those numbers going up. People are in the waiting room and then joining. So got people from all over today, which is fantastic. Brilliant. Okay, so I think we'll get started because we're recording. We've got a lot to get through today. So a huge welcome to everyone joining today's webinar, Exploring When Physical Activity Becomes a Problem. My name's Hayley Jarvis and I'm the Head of Physical Activity at Mind. And we are really pleased to be doing this session today. It's the first time that we've really broached this topic. And it's a very busy day today. It's World Book Day, it's University Mental Health Day, and check out our website. We've just launched some new resources today around student mental health and dealing with stress. Brilliant animation. And also it's National Eating Disorders Week. So whilst eating disorders will be part of the discussion today, as you're going to see, there's lots of different reasons why physical activity can become a problem. But before I get going, I just wanted to also introduce my co-chair for today. I'm delighted to be co-chairing with Debbie Butler from our National Physical Activity Advisory Group and a member of our project group who has been shaping this work. So if you can give everyone a wave there, Debs. That's great, fantastic. So before we get started and introduce all the speakers today properly, just briefly wanted to say we are joined by Emily and Hamid from our project advisory group, who you'll get to know a little bit more, Martin Lewis, high performance badminton coach from Nottingham University, and Dr. Caroline Plateau, senior lecturer in psychology from Loughborough University. So you're going to hear a little bit more from those shortly. So just a few housekeeping things to get us started. So during the session, we're going to ask that you all keep on mute just to reduce any background noise. I'm sure you're all very familiar with Teams and Zoom now. So you know that there is a chat function, so you can really use that during the session to sort of join in the conversation throughout. And just to say, the session is being recorded, so it will be available afterwards. And if you have any colleagues who hope to join today but couldn't make it, then you can certainly share that with them afterwards. So we are talking about a new topic area for us at Mind today. And when we're talking about physical activity as a problem or too much of a good thing, and our speakers will be sharing their own personal experiences. So this means we're going to touch on topics such as self-harm, eating problems, and over-exercising. An addiction. So it's really important that you keep yourself safe during this session. So if you need to step away at any time, please do so. The session is being recorded. And if you need to reach out for help and support, then you can do that via the Mind info line, Shout, or Samaritans, and we'll pop those details in the chat room. So most importantly, take care of yourself during this session. Okay. So I'll just get rid of my screen. Bear with me. This is where the technology and me on a friend. Here we go, so that we can see everyone's lovely faces. Brilliant, thanks for popping that in the chat box there. So during this session, we are going to explore this whole new topic of physical activity as a problem. For so long, we've spent the time talking about why we need to get active for our mental health. And actually, we know for some of us that it can be really difficult, particularly in a community setting. This hasn't really been talked about before. So with people over-exercising, the difficult relationship between eating problems and physical activity, and managing difficult thoughts and feelings. We're going to inform through people sharing their own personal experience, and we're going to wrap up by identifying some resources and tools that can support individuals and organisations. So I'm going to hand the baton over to my co-chair, Debbie now, who's going to share a little bit more about the session. Over to Debbie.
Great, thanks Hayley, and thank you all for coming. Yeah, the session is can be quite thought-provoking, and give you about it. We've talked about taking extra care of yourselves. It's been difficult for some of us to talk about this issue. So this is like Hayley says, it's a early piece of work that Mind are doing, but I think it's a fascinating piece of work which really does need to be done. So thank you again for coming, and we're going to a discussion with some, and the panel will be able to help and advise on different things. So thank you again for coming.
Brilliant. I think we've got a few signal problems, so bear with us on the technology. So yeah, at Mind we promote physical activity as a way to help us stay well, reduces the risk of depression by up to 30%. It's an incredibly effective treatment when someone's struggling with their mental health, particularly mild, moderate depression. Many of you would have heard Free Get Set to Go. We've supported over 8,500 people with mental health problems to use the peer support model. And we've heard how it can be life-changing and sometimes life-saving. However, sometimes it's described as a miracle cure. But at Mind, we know it doesn't work for everyone. And that language can be really dangerous. For some people, there just are so many barriers to getting active in the first place. And for others, it can become too much of a good thing. So that's why it's a really complicated and emotive issue. So it's important that we don't make any judgments or assumptions that people have a mental health problem because they're overtraining. There may be so many reasons in someone's life why they're exercising every day or multiple times. Perhaps if they're an elite athlete or there's something else, but it can be a sign, an indication that something else is going on. So there's a whole range of reasons why people might need to take care around physical activity, people that are experiencing anxiety or panic attacks, side effects of medication, compulsive or addictive feelings around exercise, which can be a sign of exercise addiction and a form of self-harm, people with eating problems. So we're going to focus on the latter two in particular today. And as Debbie says, we've been shaping this over a few months. And it's not been easy. Actually, finding people to come forward to talk to us about this topic can be really difficult. It's a bit of a taboo or a sensitive topic. Some people aren't aware that it's an issue for them, or perhaps they are aware, but it's really delicate and sensitive for them. And perhaps the stigma is just too great. So just also wanted to sort of say today that we are looking for more people to help shape this work. And we've pulled together a small group of people who have been sharing their experiences, interviews. We've been developing some content that we'll launch in April. And we're going to be doing some polling, because what we need to understand is the extent of this issue, particularly in a community setting. But we're just scratching the surface, really. So over the next year, we'll be doing more to develop some guidance and practical tools. So, thank you for being here today and for joining the conversation. So before we get into the discussion, which I think is the bit that you're all really here for, I just wanted to share a couple of myths and misconceptions to sort of frame the conversation today. So number one, over-exercising is always linked to eating problems or addiction. False. So while we know that it can be linked to an eating problem or addiction, which may need specialist support, there are many reasons people have told us they find physical activity a problem. Some people, it can help start out as being a really helpful coping strategy that becomes really difficult to take a break from. For others, it's a way to avoid difficult thoughts and feelings, and it can mask what is truly troubling someone. So on the outside, someone's looking really athletic, really healthy, but on the inside, there's a lot more going on. Number two, over-exercising can be a form of self-harm. True. It is on the self-harm spectrum, and we know it can cause both physical and emotional harm. So it's really important that we try to understand and help people understand the underlying reasons for over-exercising. And the third one, before we get into the discussion, is having a difficult relationship with physical activity can be lonely or isolating. True. So as it's a rarely discussed topic, it can be really hard for people to express how they're feeling and to feel validated. So as we mentioned, someone might be unaware of the issues with physical activity. They might not know how to articulate their experiences. And this issue, on top of all their other problems, might not seem related to it. All the other things that they're feeling. So listening and being non-judgmental is really important to help people feel that they can open up. And a quote that really resonated with me was one that was from Ellie on our group, who sadly couldn't join us today. But she says, it's really isolating. There is no AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, for people who are over exercising. There's no club, there's no group, no one talks about it. So I think we're groundbreaking today. So I think it's time for us to hear from the experts who've been shaping this work. So I'm going to introduce each of the panelists in turn and ask them to introduce themselves so you can hear about their relationship with this topic and why they got involved. So firstly, I'll come to Debbie, who's our physical activity national advisory group member and co-chair of this group. So over to you, Debbie.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, I live and work in Nottingham, and I only really started to exercise properly about 5 years ago, maybe a bit longer than that, after starting to work for the University of Nottingham, and it did become a problem. One of my diagnoses is a borderline personality disorder, part of which I have an eating disorder, which works alongside the problem I have with exercise. So I'm looking forward to working with Mind on this and being the chair of the group and helping to shape what we do in the future.
Thanks, Debbie, and it's great that Debbie's co-chairing the project group working on this piece of work. So we can go now to Hamid, who's also on our national advisory group and a member of this project group. Welcome, Hamid.
Hello, hi. Can everybody see me on screen? Yeah, that's great. Hi, I'm Hamid Khan, and I'm one of the Lived Experience Advisory Panel member for this project. And I got involved because what came to me as a shock that if you got mental health issues, your life expectancy is on average 9 years shorter than someone who doesn't have mental health issues. And obviously when you have mental health issues, it impacts on the kind of where you live, what you eat, and how you're exercising. And some of my personal experiences have been that sports and physical activities and leisure centers are not friendly for people with mental health issues because there's a lack of knowledge. And I got involved because when I was going through severe mental health issues, I was over exercising and became very obsessed with body image and as in like, and I always felt fat. And I think I want to be here today and have been part of the project to say, how can we support people with mental health issues to understand what is exercise and what is not exercise and becomes torture and punishment rather than an enjoyable activity. Thank you.
Thanks, Hamid. And Hamid's been an activist on this from the start. So moving across to Emily, who's also from our advisory group. Welcome, Emily.
Hi. I'm a bit nervous, sorry. So I'm Emily. I'm a student, and when it's not COVID, I'm also a PT, a sports coach, and a competitive athlete. So I really love exercise. But alongside that, I suffer with my mental health. It's been quite bad in the past, and I'm also very hyperactive. So for me, I'm really thrilled that we're having this conversation right now, because I used to struggle with self-harm quite a lot. And one of the ways that I stopped doing that was by exercising. And I would just get people saying to me, well, it's good, you're exercising, and not recognizing you're exercising for 10 hours a day. So I think for me, it's just this sort of conversation needs to happen, because people see exercise as a good thing and they don't seem to recognize when it's damaging.
Fantastic. Thank you, Emily. And moving across to Martin. So Martin Lewis is the head of performance badminton at Nottingham University. So welcome to the team.
Thank you, Hayley. Good morning, everybody. Hope you are all well. Yeah, thanks for obviously inviting me along to chat today. I'm here because I know Debs. I work with Debs with her badminton, but I also work with all the students at University of Nottingham as well as people out in the community, very ad hocly, but I do some work coaching out in the community as well. Having known Debs for 4 to 5 years now, throughout her exercise life, as she says earlier. There've been ups and downs, and the conversation about over exercising has come through that relationship that we've built over that time. And I think through Deb's chairing, or co-chairing, sorry, this group, we've come onto the conversation that we've had going back a while, and hopefully we can explore that a bit more today and ongoing.
Brilliant. Thank you, Martin, and great to have a sort of the coach's insight from today. And moving on to another insight, so delighted to have Dr. Caroline Plateau, Senior Lecturer in Psychology at Loughborough University. So Caroline's research is focused around the relationship between exercise behaviours and eating attitudes among athletes and clinical and adolescent populations. And Caroline's been phenomenal at supporting us with some of our resource development. So on behalf of the team, a huge thank you. So over to Caroline.
Pleasure. Thank you very much for having me, Hayley. It's a real honour to be part of the panel today. As Hayley said, I'm a senior lecturer in psychology at Loughborough, and I've been researching unhealthy exercise attitudes and behaviours in athletes and exercisers for about 10 years now. And I'm interested in why compulsive exercise or unhealthy attitudes to exercise behaviours occur, how they occur, and also how they can affect other aspects of our mental health and well-being. We know that there's a link, for example, with anxiety, with low mood, and specifically eating problems, which I know we're going to talk about as well today. And I just reinforce some of the things that Hayley's already said today. It's not necessarily, it can be quite a difficult topic to talk about, but it's also not always about how much exercise someone's doing, but about their relationship with exercise, and understanding the underlying motivations for why people are exercising is really important in establishing whether or not an issue with exercise exists. So that's something we can certainly talk more about as we go through today.
Fantastic, and welcome. So from the conversations, from the interest we've had in today, I think we've had over 160 people book onto this. Feels like it's a groundbreaking moment that we're starting to have this conversation. It's a bit of a revolution that we're talking about it, yet we've all known perhaps for a while that it's been a problem. So I guess just starting with Debbie, and we'll come around the panel. Why do we think it's rarely talked about sort of topic, physical activity as a problem?
Yeah, I really didn't think it was a problem for myself until this conversation started, and I think it's got worse over lockdown, because we initially were allowed out for an hour every day, and I took that opportunity up because I'm a people person. I don't like being seeing the same four walls every day. But over lockdown, it has become quite a problem where things aren't getting done because I'm going out walking or I'm exercising. And Martin will be pleased to hear that I'm doing my badminton drills as well. So it does become a problem to a point where, for myself, it's as though it's an obsession that it has to happen. Initially, it started off with the fact that when I went out for a walk, it would make me feel better. But that walk has got longer and longer, and it's more of a problem to actually make me feel better by exercising. So for me, this project will be brilliant to talk about and educate the general public about it as well. As Hayley says, we'll talk about how good it is for us to exercise, but for somebody with an eating disorder as well, it's quite a secretive behaviour that people behind closed doors and don't often talk about it. I'd be really pleased to hear any comments to try and alleviate this problem. Thank you.
And I might just bring in Emily there, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So your perspective is slightly different, isn't it?
It is, yeah. So I think for me, hang on, I need to remind myself of the question. Sorry, ADHD.
Why are you talking about physical activity?
Yeah. So I think that for me, a big thing is that, Debbie has mentioned eating disorders, and that's obviously quite often that will be a factor in it. But for me, that's not sort of what's driven my things. For me, it's like really is hyperactivity and coping with difficult emotions that's the driving force. And I think that quite often when people hear over exercising or overtraining, they sort of, their mind goes eating disorder. And that's, I think it's more complex than that. And I think there's more causes for this problem than people realize. Yeah.
Thanks, Emily. And Hamid, I know we've had some conversations around sort of body image and this topic. Can we bring you in here to sort of share your experiences? Is that okay?
Yes, please. Thank you so much. So as I mentioned earlier on before, what it's like when you have mental health issues and you're going through a mental distress. I struggled because I was struggling with my own sexuality in terms of not being able to identify with being gay and Muslim and Pakistani. And it was having a big impact on my mental well-being, then also was having impact on how, because I wasn't comfortable with who I was and I wasn't comfortable with what I was going through, I found it very difficult to accept my body, and I always felt fat and ugly, and image distortion was a big part, which led me to believe that the more weight I lose, the more I will look good and I will feel good. And also I over-exercise and start to have it as an obsession where morning, evening, afternoon, it's like I couldn't sit still for a second. It's like every time I sat down, I thought, oh, I'm not burning calories. I was doing excessively too much. And what I like to share the message that if people were trained on mental health issues in the leisure centres, one of the instructors or the staff would have picked up and thought, hang on, this is strange. This person comes in twice a day, 3 times a day, over-exercising 7 days a week. This is not healthy. Maybe we should approach and discuss and talk with him. And because that wasn't done, after a couple of months, I was extremely exhausted and my mental health issues had gone worse. And in the long run, I started to have more difficulties because I was so drained and exhausted that the thought of exercise was making me feel a sense of anxiety. And then I completely cut off from the leisure centre for over 6 to 12 months before I got educated and raised understanding that you're supposed to only exercise 3-4 times a week and you get more benefits than doing it 7 days a week, twice a day. Thank you.
And thank you for sharing that, Hamid. I mean, there's so many emotions going on with it, isn't there, in terms of, you know, shame and sort of understanding that it can be an issue. The fear of sort of being made to stop, I think, is a real challenge, and that why it makes it such a taboo that this thing that really helps you might be taken away from you. And certainly, you know, understanding that's why many people will exercise when they're injured or ill, or perhaps when they shouldn't be. Caroline's nodding there. Can I bring you in?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think you know, the research resonates with what others have said, in that it can be a coping mechanism for managing difficult emotions. It can be people can exercise because they want to try and change the way their body looks or feels, and those exercise behaviors can become very rigid, and you know, people will engage in those over and over and over again because they're trying to make themselves feel better, or they're trying to avoid feeling bad. And certainly the research would definitely support that. And, you know, as Emily said, it's not always necessarily associated with eating problems, but it can be. And for lots of people, it is masking perhaps difficulties with their relationship with food as well.
Thank you. So it's complicated, and certainly that's why it's so important for us that people share their experiences and that we get this right. We're not going to fix it in one webinar, but to start to build understanding of why the, you know, behaviours exist and the associations, and definitely things that we can do. But just wanted to sort of touch on COVID. How can we not? We're living in a global pandemic, and it's obviously restricted what we can and can't do right now. While some people have thrived, have loved spending more time at home with their families, we've seen a lack of access to services. We've seen people's usual coping strategies being taken away, and some real worrying insight, particularly around people with addictions and eating problems in that first lockdown in particular. So I guess probably starting with Caroline, if that's okay, just to explore how COVID has impact on people's physical activity behaviours.
Yeah, and this is a really interesting one. I think there's lots of data just about starting to emerge, particularly from that first lockdown. I don't think we quite understand the impact that this second phase of lockdown has had yet, and certainly happening at a different time of year. It might be a little bit different to perhaps what was happening back in March and April. But data from the early course of the pandemic has started to reveal some really interesting findings about changes in people's activity levels. So the Zoe study from King's College London is one of the biggest studies that's been done in the UK, with data from over 1 million people. And what they've shown, at least so far, is that there's been a high, what they call a disruption index to physical activity, which basically means people's activity has changed quite a lot over the course of the pandemic. So for some people, that might mean doing lots more exercise than they were perhaps doing before. And for other people, it might be doing quite a bit less. But there's not so many people who've just kind of stayed the same. So it seems to have been one of those behaviours where people have seen quite a lot of change in how they have navigated this pandemic. So as I said, some people are doing more and some people are doing less. The people who are doing more, it seems to be that things like their mental health might be one of the driving factors for why they're doing more activity. And it was really interesting hearing Deb's story about that, in the sense that actually being allowed to go out and do activity that becomes a real kind of safe space for them, a bit of an opportunity to get away, to get out of the house, and it can be quite therapeutic, at least in the initial stages. So people who are struggling with anxiety, people who are feeling lonely, tended to see a kind of greater disturbance to their exercise attitudes and also their exercise behaviours over the course of the pandemic, perhaps becoming more rigid in the way that they're exercising and perhaps becoming a bit more compulsive about their exercise behaviours. And linked to that, and what Hayley alluded to, is that people who were perhaps struggling with their eating behaviours prior to the beginning of the pandemic were also a vulnerable group when it comes to activity. So people who perhaps had an eating disorder diagnosis or were just struggling with their eating behaviour, again, tended to show more of these unhealthy exercise behaviours as a result of lockdown. So more rigid exercise practices, perhaps feeling like they lost a bit of control over their exercise behaviours over the course of the pandemic. So there's some really interesting data coming out, and it certainly has, it does seem that it's affected people very differently in lots of different ways, but certainly there does seem to be some groups of the population who are a bit more vulnerable to some of these unhealthy exercise attitudes and behaviours as a result of lockdown.
Yeah, it certainly seems very polarised, and I guess that's been my experience as Coach Hayley and Volunteer Hayley and all sorts of Hayleys that we have seen that as well, that some people have just done less, and then for others much more. Emily, I don't know if you're up for sort of sharing how COVID's impacted on your sort of exercise routines.
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, I was when COVID started, I was sort of kind of I was doing a bit of stuff for Get Set to Go, and then I was doing a bit of coaching and stuff. And when COVID started, I was like, oh, okay, so maybe I'll see what videos I can recommend to people. And then I did every single, like Les Mills, every single fitness blender. I did all of the videos. But that just still wasn't enough. And, I was going out once a day, and it was sort of like an hour's run, and then it was an 1.5 hour run. And then I started doing triathlons and half marathons and things, and going out for bike rides, and it just got more and more and more. And it was just what started off as an hour a day. It was like, well, if it's once a day, but I do a half marathon and then a bike ride, but I don't come back to my house, still only one form of exercise a day, technically. It did get a bit out of hand. It's sort of much more under check now, but certainly at the start of the pandemic, I think I'd sort of lost all of my normal coping mechanisms, and it just crept back in.
Great to hear that it's a bit more under control now, and I think that was a challenge, wasn't it, when everything got took away from us, and hanging on to the things that we had control of. And definitely that really resonates with me personally as well. And Hamid, how about you? How have you found lockdown with your physical activity?
So first of all, lockdown came out of the blue in a shock. Never been through my lifetime in a situation where you need to be on a house arrest, because I'm using the word house arrest because that's how it felt like in the first lockdown. It was almost like I'm in a, it's like just being at home and not being able to get out. And then suddenly you start to get really winded up and think, I can't do anything because I used to go to the sauna and steam and swim once a week. That was my little time as a carer, where that was my little treat. And I enjoyed having that as part of my well-being routine. When the lockdown happened, everything closed. There's no gyms, there's no swimming pool, there's no sauna steam. And I started to put weight on, I started to feel low. And then I discovered that it's amazing that when you can't do something, how much you appreciate what you can do. And the park that's a couple of roads away from me, I never paid attention and never took notice of and took it for granted. I suddenly started appreciating it. So in the COVID-19, what it's done is it's enabled me to understand that exercise and taking control of well-being, I have choice on. What I don't have a choice where I do it, because gyms are closed, swimming pools, I have choice that I can still move and keep active. So this happened by default in the COVID. There was a chap that used to go jogging around where I live. And one day I talked to him, I said, oh, I see you every day going off. And he said, yeah, you should join me sometime as long as we keep our distance. And I did join him once or twice, but as we got out there, more and more people started joining in. And now even today, you see those people, 6, 7 people on a regular basis, doing it together, in a sense, keeping the distance, but doing it together. Because I think the worst thing with exercise is feeling alone and doing on your own. So what the COVID-19 has done is got people to engage with their people in the local community to do something.
Thanks, Hamid. And I think that you raised some really good points there around that choice and control. And obviously, when we're finding it as that sole coping strategy, that then it's with
opportunities. Thank you.
Oh, sorry, sorry there, Hamid. I think we had a slight technical hitch. That choice and control, I think, is something where I think it's really important, isn't it? And understanding sort of the motivations behind that. And I guess I was just thinking about not having other people around you to maybe keep you in check a little bit, or your gym buddies or your running pals to actually say, really, the people to sort of kind of question and sort of check that you're okay. And I guess that brings me on to sort of my next question, which is really around how our peers, but also how sports and physical activity providers can really play a role in spotting somebody is finding physical activity is a problem. I'd like to come across to Martin first. You've obviously met Debs as Coach Martin, so it'd be great to sort of explore how you spotted it was becoming a problem and what you think sports coaches could do to sort of help people who are struggling with doing too much.
Yeah, just to touch on a couple of points really that Hamid made earlier about a leisure centre sports attendant or within the gym. Is finding those relationships that are close enough, not too close, but close enough that will spot differences in what you're doing, things like that, behaviours. I've noticed that, like I said, I've known Debs for 4 years probably now, and Debs feel free to jump in at any time here. You build up that a relationship and a trust in that person. I also have it with the players that I coach as well, and knowing that player, subtle differences. It could be not speaking for the day, or how they walk in, shoulders down, or just different mannerisms spark off conversation, and it could be that person doesn't want to speak today anyway, and okay, that's fine for me. I'll standoffish. We'll carry on with a bit of exercise, and then we'll pick up a bit later. But through maybe Debs' situation with the overtraining, and we're probably going back a little while now, Debs. It's you definitely weren't yourself, and through this conversation that we had, and it wasn't just myself, it was one of the other attendants at the sports centre. We came up with a plan to try and sort out, number one, why Debs was feeling as she was feeling. And it came out of that conversation that, as she's alluded to, she was doing miles more than what she previously had been doing. Would that be right, Debs?
Yeah, and I think for me, it always takes a while to get to trust people when you be honest, because I think being honest about it is one of the biggest assets. And I think Martin and I built up that trust where I could actually tell him that, yeah, I wasn't good, or maybe, I don't know, I couldn't do that particular exercise or drill today because of whatever. But for me, I think the biggest thing was building up that trust in your coach, and being honest. And it's been difficult over lockdown having those conversations, because Martin's busy, I'm busy with other work and exercising. So it has been difficult to be truthful with anybody about it, because you don't have that body language, you don't have that physical presence there, which I'm quite a people person, so I function far better with people around me. And I think building up trust is a big thing. And later on in the seminar, we talk about how people can actually help with that. And I think Mind have had a campaign where they ask people to ask how people are, but then ask again, because that first ask might go unnoticed. And Martin's very good at that. He's always very good at asking me twice how I really am. And I do, most of the time, I'm very honest with him. And that really helps, being honest. I'm quite open about my diagnosis and my struggles that I have. But I've come a long way since I started training. Even at my age, I can outrun some of the students at the university now. So, you know, it has done me a lot of good. But at the moment, it's probably a bit much.
Well, lost Debs there.
Thank
But
you.
no, and I think just to jump in, and Hamid mentioned as well about choice, and you, obviously that's part of the conversation that we had with Debs, was you've got your week here, we're going to plan your week out, and you're going to try and stick to it, but you have a choice whether you stick to it or not. And how does that make you feel? Number one, are you less tired? Mental health wise, are you feeling better? Are you under control of your eating? And Deb's had a choice to make there. And don't get me wrong, some weeks were up, some weeks were down. But I think through regular contact with myself and Debs and other people within the university as well, you get to mold how that week looks to make you control your week and how you feel. And that was a big thing. And having something written down on a sheet of paper for some people works. For some people, I think it will be conversation. I have conversations with the students. There's a lot going on in student life. I have players that are elite, playing for England and playing for their countries, as well as lower end as well, just doing it socially. And, you know, just noticing things about them. Everybody's the same, but you all have a choice. I put a plan out for a player, but it's their choice whether they go and do that. You know, I'm all for promoting exercise, but it has to be balanced. And Debs, I think we found that with yourself through periods. Through periods, you didn't find that balance. Obviously, COVID has hit. You're again trying to find a balance with what you're doing. And if you can find that balance, you do tend to feel much better with having that. And it's having those people around you and to spark off those conversations to try and get you to within feeling balanced with your whole lifestyle, I suppose it is. Because with Debs, it was work, it was exercise, eating, family time, everything was spoken about there.
And I think it for me, I can't sort of overemphasize the fact that for me, having that person that you can actually talk to about it, because it from my own experience, having a lot of mental health problems and eating disorder, etc., it can be a lonely world. So I think people need to talk about it, and I think this project will enable that to happen. It might take a long time, but I think if we educate people in the fact that this does happen, it can be, the education will have to be targeted at the right people. And for me as co-chair, I would like to see the media used in this campaign, local media, to talk about this problem, and hopefully go on to not solve it, because I don't think it is solvable, but I think we could rein it in a bit. But thank you, Martin.
Oh, it's such a lovely sort of getting to know you both and sort of hearing how you support each other. But I think you pick up some really good points there about building the trust, the sort of the relationship that you have, being able to sort of educate and put the foundations in place, but then, you know, ultimately it is down to the athlete as sports coaches and professionals. Gym instructor Hayley, you know, I can't fix people, so it's really important that we're aware of our boundaries around that. But I just wanted to come to Emily to sort of really hone in on what are the big signs that people should be looking for that someone's struggling with this. What would you say? Because you've got a couple of hats, haven't you?
I have got a couple of hats. Yeah, I actually wanted to respond to something that Martin was saying as well. I don't know.
Okay, yeah, do that.
First, or which is that I think that, and I'm not saying that you didn't do this when you were sort of talking to Debs, but I think that, like, for me, it's not just a case of like having a plan for what I should be doing in a week. I know what I should be doing in a week. I'm a sort of trained fitness provider. I know how much I should be doing. I think it's also a case of having that conversation, and like, I don't know how to rest. I do not know how to sit still. I don't watch TV or anything like that. I just don't enjoy it. And so I feel like part of the conversation also needs to be sort of, do you have things that you can do that you enjoy doing that are not this? Because I think there is a big assumption, isn't there, in the world that, like, you know, everyone likes to slob out in front of Netflix and eat crisps and things, but actually for some of us that's really hard. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I can't jump in there. I think definitely. And like for myself, if I was to hear that, it would be the conversation, right? What can we do that's less strenuous, that is enjoyable, that you want to do it? Maybe it is out in the garden if you've got a garden, or if it is I don't know, anything that you think. I'd have to explore myself, but I feel as a coach, or if you were to have that conversation, you'd explore what is less strenuous, that is not 100% going hell for leather for that's over exercising. And again, I think that would be conversation with whoever you feel most comfortable having that conversation with. I would hope that myself having a conversation with my players, that I could do that. Obviously, Deb's included in that. I
mean, I will say that it's probably easier with someone you do coach, isn't it? Because I know that when I'm coaching, you've got a sort of like, there's an interesting relationship as a coach between you and your players, because you do get to know them really well, and I think that definitely helps, doesn't it, in sort of recognizing the signs. I know. For sure. Me, if I'm coaching people, if they're coming every week and they look like they're not having a good time and they're not getting any better and things like that, I start to think, what's going on here? Something is going on. Like, you shouldn't be coming to this thing that you're paying to do in your free time, that you're meant to be enjoying,
and not enjoying,
having a rubbish time. So I think there's like other psychological things like that, isn't it? It's not just how much they're doing, it's also, are they actually getting anything out of it? Does it look like they're punishing themselves doing it? It's like, no.
fantastic conversation there, and the whole point about rest, and it really struck me in all the conversations I've been having with people about this, actually how few coaches and instructors, and sorry guys if you do this on the call, but how few talk about rest in all the conversations that I've had. Very, very few, and that might happen at the elite end, but certainly in community, and that's really strikes me as something quite practical that we can be thinking about as coaches. But I guess I wanted to bring Carol in here. So you've been doing lots of work in particularly the elite field around this, but I know when we spoke you had a really good metaphor or analogy that I wondered if you'd share with everyone around this.
Yeah, and it's about kind of how coaches and sports professionals things kind of tackle this and manage this situation, because it can be really difficult. And Martin's an excellent example of someone who's got a really good relationship with Debs, and they managed to have a really productive conversation and supportive relationship with this. And I think that's what we can all aspire to do. But some of our research with coaches in managing difficult relationships with exercise and eating problems in particular has suggested that there's kind of 3 ways that people can deal with this, and we've used kind of animal analogies to try and describe what we mean when we're talking about this. And the first one is are you an emu? So an emu being someone that kind of buries, or an ostrich, and buries their head in the sand when they're faced with an athlete or an exerciser who might be presenting with some difficult or problematic practices. Perhaps they've noticed that they're more tired than usual. Perhaps they have noticed that they're doing more exercise. Perhaps they're struggling with their eating. And someone who's a kind of more of an ostrich type person might be bury their head in the sand, hope that someone else will take the responsibility to have a conversation with the athlete or exerciser, and have that difficult first conversation sometimes about what's going on. So that's our kind of first analogy, and then the second one is a rhino, or someone bit of a bull in a china shop type approach, where people tend to be quite confrontational in kind of managing this situation. So perhaps they feel very anxious about what's happening to their athlete or their exerciser. Perhaps they get very worried, and some of that fear can drive quite a confrontational encounter with the athlete. And sometimes that can be perhaps using kind of if-then statements. So if you don't do this, then you won't be able to do that, which is quite counterproductive and doesn't usually result in a good outcome for anybody, or kind of threatening the athlete with the fact that they can't train anymore, or they're not allowed to come to sessions if they don't do something. But what we're all aspiring to be is a bit like Martin, or kind of what we'd say was be a dolphin a type approach, whereby we're supportive as coaches. We're gently guiding and nudging people in the right direction towards perhaps support, perhaps gradually getting to kind of the root of the problem, having productive conversations and open and honest communication about what's going on, and to help them seek support that's right for them at the right time. So those are our kind of 3 animal analogies about how perhaps we can all aspire to be more dolphin-like than emu or ostrich or rhino-like initially.
Fantastic. And hopefully, the fact so many people are here today, there's been some conversation in the chat around sort of educating coaches around this, and around working together. So working with mental health services and sports services working together, which is something at Mind we would always advocate. That's where you get the best outcomes, when you use people's expertise. I think is absolutely key. I just wanted to share a quote before we sort of move on to our next question. But so this is also from one of our experts by experience, who says, one of the reasons I struggled with exercise was that I found it difficult to deal with the feelings of depression and post-traumatic stress disorder. And I certainly couldn't express them. Exercising helped numb these feelings, and without realising it, I ended up over-exercising. I only stopped when I developed conditions that left me in horrendous pain. I would have been really grateful had others recognised I had problems, and if they did recognise, had tried to talk to me. None of these conversations are easy, but they are really vital. So I think it's something that we all can do, and certainly everyone I've talked to, wants support often, but may not know how to ask for help as well, and it can be that real challenge. But just thinking, obviously, Carolyn, you've researched this area in elite athletes. So what can we learn in a community grassroots sort of setting from all of the research that you've been doing?
Yeah, I mean, certainly some of our research has focused on kind of athletes aspiring to be kind of national, international level, but we have incorporated people from athletes from all the way through, from club level all the way through to kind of those who are at the very top end of their sport. And elite sport is slightly different in the sense that it obviously carries additional pressures around performance, which it can impact on mental health in different ways. And as we spoke about right at the start of this session, physical activity can have huge benefits for people's mental health, particularly at recreational levels. And that goes without saying. But it's important to note that these the things that we're talking about today can affect everyone. It's not just a case of it's only affecting people at the elite level. Compulsive exercise, eating problems can present in any setting, both at community level and all the way through to elite athletes. And so it's possibly more common in sports like triathlon or endurance sports, where there's a real kind of focus on volume or amount of activity. But not just that, and they can certainly occur in sports across the whole spectrum and across lots of different types of exercise settings as well. So it's really important for us all to be aware that and vigilant, I guess, for the occurrence of these problems, regardless of the setting that we're working in or the groups of athletes and exercisers that we're working with, because they don't discriminate. It can affect anybody.
Fantastic. And I think it's an area that we're really committed to understanding more and gaining that insight. So whether it's spending lots of time at the skate park, or whether it is, as you say, somebody in a running club, we know it affects lots and lots of people, and definitely we want to sort of understand it much more. So just to sort of wrap up the conversations, I'm going to go around each of our panelists, if that's okay, and ask you for two things. What more needs to be done in this area, and what's your one tip for everyone that's listening today? So if it's all right, I will start with Deb. Is that okay?
Yeah, and for me, I think one thing that could be done is, I mentioned it before about education, and I believe strongly in education. I work a lot in mental health research and health research, and I think it helps to educate people around activities that maybe aren't talked about. And I think the other thing that I would recommend is the conversation that people have is ask twice. It does help.
Fantastic. Thank you for that, Debs, and definitely ask twice. Great video on Time to Change if you haven't seen it. It's like 60 seconds long, if that. Brilliant resource. Okay, we'll go to Hamid next. So what more needs to be done, and your tip for everyone listening today?
I think first of all, what needs to be done is the acknowledgement that anybody can have mental health issues, and 1 in 4 people go through mental health issues at any point of time. So that means that nobody's immune to it, and nobody can say, I'm going to be mental health, I'm immune to it, in the sense I'm never going to get it. The fact is that it does catch up with us in different points of our lives. So we need to ensure that we need to have very, very clear training for all staff that work in the leisure industry around, like mental health first aid program that teachers have gone through, similar program that could be run for all the staff to pick up on the signs, but not be afraid to ask people. You don't have to ask people, do you have mental health issues? But you can say to someone like, I've noticed you're coming in every day. Is there a reason? Are you working towards a goal? And through the conversation, you might pick up, actually, there's something not right here. And then you build that rapport to address some of the issues. Secondly, what I like to say very quickly is that mental health has been something that requires more investment, in the sense that it doesn't get the same amount of investment, and maybe leisure industries can put some budget aside to look at ways to make their centres more mental health friendly. There's a great project in Manchester that was run, and it was about making all GP doctor surgeries LGBT friendly, and they went through this training and this process, and then they would get this placard that they would put in the reception to show that they're an LGBT friendly doctor surgery. Why can't we have a similar kind of a process for all the leisure industries, community leisure centres and gyms, where they go through a training and process and they get a placard that says, we are a mental health friendly organization and we have staff here who are trained. So if you require support, feel free to ask. Because if I walked in, I saw that in reception saying mental health friendly, I would feel quite comfortable to open up about my mental health issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Hamid, and that's really helpful. We certainly have the Quest G+37, which probably most people haven't heard of, which is around long-term health conditions, and a client mark. I think there's more. It's not very public-facing, very friendly, and mental health is part of that, so enables me to give a plug. So I'll come to Emily quickly, conscious of time. What are your words of advice for everyone on the call today?
I think my words of advice would be, don't assume you know what the problem is unless you've spoken to somebody. And have I got another second? Have I got yeah. And I think the thing that I'd really love to see coming out of this sort of project is, leisure facilities and fitness providers are basically, they are doing healthcare provision, aren't they? And I would love to see a two-way conversation between primary healthcare providers and fitness providers. I'd love to live in a world where doctors can refer people to a gym, but a gym can also refer somebody to a doctor. I mean, that's just the dream, but yeah.
Oh, fantastic. Well, let's hope. I have big ambitions for this piece of work and for the group, so let's see what we can do. So over to Martin, your parting words of wisdom.
First off, I think forums like this are great, and I think it's starting off a conversation. There's plenty going on in the chat there, and I think having more chance, whether this branches off into different, maybe you have elite sport and then you have recreational sport, or something along those lines, I think would be great. Because I know there's quite a few more elite sport questions within the chat there, and I think just building that relationship with people, with students, with sports people, with whoever, and that could be a coach, that could be somebody in your family, it could be anybody. I think having that relationship, that you can have that open talk with, will be key moving forward.
Fantastic. All about those relationships. And finally, Carolyn, for your advice before we very quickly wrap up.
Yeah, thanks, Hayley. I mean, I would just say it's really important to think about how we can most effectively support people who have a difficult relationship with exercise to develop a more positive relationship with exercise, because we know it has such huge benefits for people on the whole, and it's about trying to help people still maintain a positive relationship with exercise throughout their lives. And I think in terms of a tip for sports and physical activity providers to share, I would just say it's about trying to make sure that people are vigilant and to trust your instinct. So if something doesn't feel right with a client or with an athlete or an exerciser, then to trust that and have a conversation about it, because that's the only way you're going to find out if there's something potentially going on.
Fantastic advice, and I think we do have these niggly feelings, our responses, they're often right, and having those conversations so important. So just to wrap up, just wanted to signpost to some of the resources that are available at the moment. As we've mentioned, most of this is around elite sport, not all, but a lot in more elite settings. Some great resources from Carolyn and the team at Loughborough. Train Brave website is all about relative energy deficiency in sports, in elite athletes, some great case studies there. And as we've mentioned a few times today, as a group, we are working on our toolkit, which will launch in April, which will give some really sort of community-based tips and advice around doing too much. Really important to signpost to sources of support, and I know Paula in the chat made some reference that that's probably one of the challenges in this area, that there's not many specialists, and something we want to sort of understand who is out there. So do get in touch. We want to make sure these guides and resources are as helpful as possible. But for anyone that is struggling, making sure sort of they reach out for help and support, and talk to someone that they trust. So we will certainly share these slides after today. And this is really the start of a conversation. We know that physical activity is beneficial for so many people, but equally it can be a problem, and we can't hide our head in the sand. We don't want to be emus, we want to be dolphins, and really support people. So we're really committed to it at Mind. So we really hope that we can work with you. I really just wanted to sort of finish up where I started by saying to take care of yourselves. We've covered some heavy topics today, and we're still in the midst of a global pandemic. So, really take care of yourself, and, trust your instinct with the people you're working with. And as Debbie said several times, ask twice. I think that's some great advice. A massive heartfelt thank you to all of our panel. You've been absolutely amazing. And thank you for your candour, your openness, and for your time when everyone is so busy. So we will capture everything from the chat. Stay in touch with us, and if you're not already signed up to our newsletter, then please sign up. So take good care of yourself, and be gentle, and hopefully work with you all in the months ahead. So thank you for joining today. Thank you. We'll close it there.